Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, all having to do with, in the first segment, about the obsession with children and the future of America between all three of the major candidates and the broader society. And then, of course, we're going to have a fun article at the end talking about why Gen Z can't type. And, of course, one today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. Why, all of a sudden, is every single side talking about kids? Why is every single side of the political spectrum talking about the future of America? Maybe it has something to do with the declining birth rates. Had an episode that I talked about it before, but I always find it very interesting when every single person seems to be talking about the same thing, at least in the political sphere, but from very different angles. It's a very interesting conversation. We'll highlight all three of the perspectives, and it all comes really from one article that talks about two of them, and then I'm going to inject the third from the third-party candidate, Robert Kennedy Jr. So, with that said, let's jump into the first article that comes from the Wall Street Journal. Kamala Harris is proposing a $6,000 baby bonus. Would it make a difference? And I understand everybody is electioned out at this point, so just election episodes don't actually resonate with people because either they don't care about the election yet, or the people that have been paying attention for so long are like, okay, hey, well, we've had enough election content. But I think these are actually very instrumental ways of looking at the worldview of the people who possibly are going to be running our country, but overall the political class when trying to talk about the issue of the next generation of America. So on a general level, why do we keep talking about kids? Because the birth rate is low. They are the future of America. They are the next voting population. They are the next tax base. They are the next creators. So if you're a politician, you're going to say, okay, who do we want to drive this economy? Oh, it's going to be the kids. If we want more money to fund some of our programs, maybe we should invite more people to our country, or we could naturally have more children. So and also future voters, obviously. So they start addressing these sort of issues purely on a practical level. And if they have a genuine interest in the survival of the society, of the civilization, then they're going to say, well, we just need more kids. We can't have a negative birth rate, or at least below replacement, because then we're going to slowly see a demographic decline, much like you're going to see in China, some of the effects we can see in Japan, where the population of older people is a little bit larger overall than the youngest generations being born. You've seen birth rates in Japan decrease ever so slightly. I believe their replacement is somewhere around 1.7. Last time I checked, it could be different now. But this is a demographic issue that we've seen across Europe as well. America has kind of been holding on. We're still below replacement, but we have such a large large total of immigration people coming in that we can actually kind of offset some of the negative effects. But both sides are starting to realize, okay, there is something going on here. We have to address it. Now, I think honestly, it's because the right has been talking about these demographic issues for a long time. Because I talk to people who are from the left, and some of them actually say we're going to have a, not necessarily Malthusian moment. They're not that far down the scales, but they do say there are limited resources across the rest of the world that eventually we're going to run out, which is fair enough. There are definitely limitations on this earth. I don't think we're anywhere near them, but at some point we will run out of resources on this earth. That's why we start turning to other planets and we go into space and so on and so forth. But then again, water in other places of the world are, not necessarily the most clean, so they'll run out of those sort of resources in other places. We will here in America as temperatures start to rise. There's definitely these sort of fears, and also across the universe there is water in, comets, but can we harvest those yet? Not necessarily. So all these sort of concerns are fair enough, but you definitely see one side of the aisle rather than the others pointing towards this actually being an issue, that we're not having enough kids. And I feel like the right has successfully messaged on this one enough that even the Democrats have to come in and have a conversation about it. And honestly, RFK Jr., I think his angle that he's taking on it it's totally different, but it is care for the children. So we'll get into all of those for sure. But with all that said, let's actually get into the article. So I already read you the headline. Let's get into one of the first two paragraphs. Quote, Vice President Kamala Harris proposed giving families of newborns a $6,000 bonus in the form of a tax credit to support their finances and well-being, an approach used in a handful of other countries. In addition to the bonus, Harris proposed reinstating the pandemic-era expansion of the child tax credit, which provided up to $3,600 per child, end quote. Now, why is this a good thing? Why is this a bad thing? Good thing, they're trying to actually encourage more child rearing. They're trying tacitly through this policy. They're saying if you have more kids, we'll provide more subsidies to you. A lot of people claim that having enough money is one of the main restrictions on why they're putting off childbirth, because things are getting more expensive. Also, and I talked about this in a previous episode, the idea of having a child is getting more expensive. And what do I mean by that? When you picture an ideal life for a child, when you picture a better life than you possibly had, a better upbringing than you had, the best upbringing for said child, the idea of what's actually good for a child has been epitomized online throughout culture of all these fancy schools, all these new products that they need, all these different expensive gadgets, gizmos that enable them to have a good life, at least in the mind of a lot of these parents. So therefore, it has become more expensive. In theory, when you are building the idea of an ideal family, it has become more expensive. That's what they're really getting at here. And those are really tough barriers to overcome. They are hard when you look at them and you say, yes, we need to actually break down this illusion that child rearing has to be so expensive. Parents are going to constantly, because obviously, if you want to be a parent, you want to provide the best for your children. So when someone tells you, no, you actually don't need this, you don't need that, it's going to be hard sometimes to get people out of that sort of psychology of, hey, they have to have the fanciest and the best. Of course, they should have a lot, but what's really important, and this article even highlights it, is making sure that they're well-fed, they are given the nutrients they need, the love and the care, especially during that first year. And that's especially what this tax credit and these $6,000 payments are supposed to go to, the first year of child rearing, because those are the really crucial times. And in this age of constant movement, of quick adaptation, and an age of automation in lots of different locations, intelligence is going to be the key determiner of movement. Because guess what? Creativity can be, don't get me wrong, but with you having AI mechanisms out there constantly able to at least interpret and readapt what people have done in the past, even though that's not purely creative, the actual ability to create those things, being a good artist, being a good lawyer who's good at speaking, all those skills are based on intelligence, but the critical thinking, the ability to reason, which also is directly correlated with intelligence and IQ level, and IQ's kind of been debunked, but we can definitely agree that it's been correlated to intelligence level. The ability to do that is extremely crucial as compared to these other creative skills, which are things that our children are innately born with and also are bred of intelligence. But one of the main things that makes human beings so different and so unique is our ability to reason. And as we have gotten smarter, as we have been able to provide more nutrients, we've seen more people on average be smarter, because that's what you actually see with the expansion of civilization. The more able that we are to provide food on a regular basis, we don't have to deal with malnutrition, especially after coming out of the age of farms, settlements, along with some other things. There are really random theories out there about psychotropics and drugs like that actually having a huge effect, which they very well could have. But we know for a fact that, especially nowadays, nutrition science has come a long way. Nutrition, and especially during those first few years, and especially during the first year, is a huge indicator of how mature and developed your brain can be. Getting the proper nutrients and sustenance to the brain as it's developing is extremely, extremely important. And that's why children in well-off families who can afford to have the best food tend to be a little bit smarter than the people who don't necessarily have the nutrition and the baby's a little bit malnourished. Now imagine if we can lift all of those people up. That's kind of the idea with this tax credit, to address this first year, this really crucial time, and going into the future economy where intelligence, raw intelligence, the ability to reason is something that's going to be ever more important, because at the end of the day, our physical labor just keeps going and going away. We used to be about physical labor machines. machines. And we got smarter. We started exporting that to animals. Then we started exporting that to machines. As we start to export even some of the intelligent mental tasks to machines, and physical labor is still something we can account on, don't get me wrong. I do understand that right now we're learning that AI is actually able to take over some of those positions that are considered white collar. They're a little bit more intellectually focused because it is just copying down. We're going to have more people that are able to use the full breadth of their intelligence and reason and actually think of new ways to combine these sort of technologies and not just do the thankless random writing that can be learned rather than is a symptom of pure intelligence. And this is my random take on it. Obviously, I could definitely be wrong because as we're learning, there are lots of machine jobs that AI can't do yet because it can't interact with the physical world. There are lots of biomechanics that go into us truly understanding how to interact with the world. And that makes it hard for AI to learn and do those sort of physical tasks. For a while now, we've been talking about AI truckers. You've heard this analogy. AI truckers were going to be the first thing that displaced a lot of people in the workforce, and it ended up being the writers and the legal aides because ChatGPT came along. So why I think it's really important is in order to overcome those sort of gaps, we need people that can logically see beyond just one field, can look beyond just the implications of their job in one place, like these lawyers, these paralegals might be able to do, because AI can tackle those single tasks and actually see cross synthesis between those two areas, which requires a lot of reasoning, and it will create a lot of adaptation within the economy. It will bring about a lot of changes, but that's why I think intelligence is going to be so crucial, because at the end of the day, we are still able to create. We have the innate ability to tap into something that already exists in the universe. If you're religious, it's God. If you're not religious, it's just a vibe, man. It's an energy, a wavelength throughout the universe that we tap into that is innately creative. We need to foster human intelligence so that we can continue to tap into that and best use it while implementing things within the world and keep on adapting and improving. And we can let the AIs do the copying tasks, the old things that we used to be really good at, as we continue to innovate. And that's why it's extremely important to foster the next generation, ensure that that first year is everybody's very well off. They have the nutrition that they need. And it's not just Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris, she's proposing 6,000, and JD Vance was even okay with saying 5,000. So you can see there's strands here. And JD Vance even is out there saying we need to encourage having more children in general because we need to have a growing society that is not in collapse. And I know I focused a lot on the nutrition there and the intelligence and kind of looking at the broader view, but it is extremely important as we go forward, not just that we have the most intelligent people, because if we really wanted to have just the most intelligent period, full stop, and we wanted to make sure that all the resources are going to enable the highest intelligence, we would actually, at this point, looking at things, we would say how many, because you would take a pure utilitarian point of view, how many babies do we have and how much food do we have? Do we have to actually decrease the number of babies in order to have the right amount of food in order to enable the most intelligent babies or intelligent people? That would be a really inverse way of looking at the situation, saying what's the amount of limited resources that we can get to those babies, and then restricting the babies or the amount of people that we're having until we can get the highest level of intelligence, ensuring that they have the highest amount of nutrition. First off, that would be a very controlling method to do so. It would also be very unethical, and it would be the maximalist, most efficient way to get to the point that I was talking about ensuring that nutrition is very, very well handled, and every single baby that is under the age of 1 is able to get the maximum amount of nutrition to help the brain development. So obviously we don't want to take that route. We do not want to go down the paperclip kind of analogy, which is, oh, well, how do we make paperclips? Oh, we annihilate everything because that's the most efficient way to make paperclips. I know I'm really stretching that analogy. I'm taking it way far out of bounds, but that's basically the joke that people always make with AI, which is, oh, well, you just train a machine to make paper clips, and then it kind of goes haywire trying to actually do it, because at the end of the day it is single-mindedly focused on something. And if we were single-mindedly focused on enhancing the intelligence of all the new babies, we would actually probably end up decreasing the amount of babies, or we would innovate and actually create more food. It's actually interesting when you look at the food production over time. Though we're able to produce more food, a lot of the food is actually less nutritious. So it's an interesting kind of inverse there, which I would love to have a further conversation about going into the future. But that's honestly besides the purview of this conversation, because we were talking about how J.D. Vance also wants to have a child tax credit. And you can see both sides here. Now, whether this is Kamala actually responding to J.D. Vance and the Trump ticket and the more Republican argument that we need more kids and provide a way to allow more people to actually do that, to show that they actually care about the future generation, I don't necessarily know. Kamala hasn't had any kids of herself, by herself, obviously. She has stepdaughters, and of course, that's a noble endeavor, going into a family that already exists and trying to take on that maternal role. Good for her. It's hard. It's very hard to do, honestly, and I respect her for going in there. Even if I don't agree with all of her policies, at least she is taking on some form of maternal role from what we can see on the outside. And also, I understand that, she married a good man, so good for her. I guess at the end of the day, she does value it to some degree. We haven't seen her actually have children of her own, but she is signaling with this choice, the $6,000 and renewing the $3,600 for the child tax credit, that this is something that we need to focus on. We want new parents to actually do well. Now, there is an interesting point where you can dissect it and ask the question, is she actually encouraging more children, which is the goal of J.D. Vance. He's also proposed something really long time ago in the past, and Ross Douthat from the New York Times actually jumped on the bandwagon of this, which is give the voting rights of the children to the parents, basically. So if you have 3 kids before they're the age of 18, you basically get to vote for them, because at the end of the day, it encourages people to have more children so that they can have more say in the political system. And it really ties back to what I was talking about before in the last episode, which is if you have children, you have a vested interest in the survival of the civilization, because you want this place to be around for your children. So therefore, enabling you to vote for them actually is a way to empower parents to have a bigger say on what goes on going into the future. All interesting ideas. And why I bring up these two little dissecting moments is because, is Kamala Harris actually worried about increasing the population size and having more children overall? She has said that they're very important to the tax base, but she also said that it's a return on investment of the children that are being born. So is it actually trying to encourage more children, or is it meant to help the parents who are already having children? I think an inverse effect won't actually, I think a unseen effect, some people would argue, well, the unseen effect is if you actually support those parents at the very beginning, then more people are going to say, oh, I'll be supported, so I'm going to have children. A lot of tax policies in other places actually have been implemented, and except for maybe one or two, like in, I believe it's Hungary. If I'm wrong on this, please tell me I'm wrong. It's either Hungary or Turkey where they implemented it so that by your 3rd child, you don't have to pay taxes anymore as a mother. That one's seen a little bit of beneficial sort of after effects, but even then, a lot of the time that you implement these sort of child helping programs, that doesn't actually reverse the decline of the population. So I think that that's a really interesting one. I'll be honest, when looking at it, saying, okay, we're going to actually increase the population here, we're going to make sure that the next generation is larger so it can take on some of these big issues coming the way, support the tax base, so on and so forth. But the question that I was getting at, sorry, I went a little bit off the rails there. The question that I was getting at is whether or not this policy is meant from Kamala Harris to support the people who already want to have kids, or it's meant to encourage more kids. I think it's actually the former rather than the latter, personally. But that doesn't necessarily mean it won't have some knock-on effects, even though we have seen that it doesn't completely reverse these sort of trends in other countries. So it's very, very interesting when we have these conversations about, and I say interesting because it's basically a blank word. Let's get rid of the word interesting. It is a very important conversation that speaks about how we view the future of our country when we have these discussions about how we're going to help future parents. I don't think that more government spending is going to resolve this issue. Personally, I understand why it's a great political appeal. Hey, you have kids, we want to help out your kids, we want to make sure that your next generation is having a better chance at creating more things, increasing the tax base, being a productive society or being productive members of society, and now actually return more value into the economy. But this is all basically if you look at both of the policies that are being proposed right now, the idea is, it's going to pay off in the future. So basically, you're spending money now, betting on the fact that it'll bring back more money in the future. That is how governments have started to operate all across the world, betting on the future GDP growth. And guess what happens when you don't see the returns that you want to see, where even if you're funding all these people who are having children, they don't actually have more children, therefore the tax base still decreases even if they're being more innovative and bringing in more money into the GDP. Like, you understand where I'm coming from. The way to fix this, the way to actually have more children, the way to address some of these issues is not through government regulation. It's not through government handout, because guess what happens to baby products when everybody's getting an extra $1,000 check? We saw it with eggs. We saw it with toilet paper. We saw it with all the essentials during COVID. Those prices went up because the government was giving out money in order for people to buy them and all these other essentials while they didn't have a job. And the prices started to go up because, one, corporations realized they can charge a little bit more for it because, there's inflation, but also because the demand increases so much, the supply side can't necessarily keep up with it, and therefore prices will go up. Now, for that to 100% be true, you have to infer that these policies will actually create more demand for baby products, which they very well might in the existing population of parents, but maybe it won't actually increase the number of babies being born so much that it actually increases the demand so much that prices go up. I can't necessarily look into the economics of that one right now, but that's a very interesting side that we have to take of it. The article actually mentions how there was one of the largest baby booms when the subsidy came out in Australia in 2004. Like, people were waiting on their pregnancies. They're like, no. Hey, guys, we can make it last another 2 weeks. We're going to cut the C-section short. We're going to try to have a natural birth. We're going to try to wait out until the beginning of 2004. And then it's still January 1st, 2004, where you've seen like the largest spike in birth rates. And this is apparently, The Economist broke it down, from parents who were trying to get that subsidy for their children. So maybe we will see a boom in the population, but I don't necessarily see that happening 100% just because the data across the world, even in China where they're trying to encourage it right now, you don't necessarily see these policies. It has to be done on the societal level. And speaking of changes on the societal level for children, this is where we get into RFK's arguments. And you're going to say, Alex, wait, hold on. He said RFK has made arguments about population and growing the population and having more children. No, but he has talked about addressing some of these issues that face children and the younger generation through the food crisis. His vaccine claims. But I think the more potent argument, the one that resonates with more people, is the amount of processed food that children intake, the increasing like fatty liver disease, these sort of health issues that people are becoming ever more conscious of, because now we've lived with processed food for so long that we're starting to see the detrimental effects of it. And he's not just framing it as, this is for the 50-year-old, this is for the 60-year-old that we need to address these things. He's saying it's for the future generation. We need to address this for ourselves, for our children, for the next generation. We need to get big ag out of some of the legislative process where they're basically favoring themselves, giving themselves beneficial contracts, and then they can use wild pesticides and other such genetically altered food in order to increase their profit margins, as they have basically a block on the market because they're one of the most heavily subsidized industries within the United States, period, hands down. It started with, I believe it was Hoover, then FDR also increased the subsidization, and you see RFK attacking it from this angle, which is a little bit more of a populist angle because there are lots of people who are genuinely concerned about this. Now, is it more than 10% of the population? No, I would say it's probably 5% of the population, and the maybe the other 40 kind of care about clean, healthy eating, and the other 50% can barely get by with the money that they're making, so they don't necessarily have time to worry about clean, healthy eating because they're just trying to survive. So I understand that it's still a small segment of the population, but it's not tiny. And this sort of message, focusing on the next generation, making sure that we're not choking them with the food that we're feeding them because it's not necessarily the right amount of nutrition. As I spoke about earlier, the more we actually started using fertilizer and we expanded the amount of crops that we were making, some of the crops, majority of the crops actually went down in nutritional value. At least that is a theory that's been posited as we started to use more not manure. We started using more artificially, I believe it was artificially, how should I say, not induced nitrogen that we started sucking out of the air as we started using more fertilizer, and we were able to do this artificially. We started putting more nitrogen into the fertilizer, which does help certain plants, but we've also started to see that the nutritional value has decreased. Especially, there are some arguments about genetically altered food actually having lower nutrition. I haven't seen really thorough studies over this, but we have seen studies about the nutritional value of food before and after the propagation of large, massive farming operations that use overly saturated nitrogen fertilizer and these sort of things. So it's interesting that all these sides are talking about the next generation. Kamala Harris is coming at it that we need to support the ones that are already being born and making possibly a tacit argument for having more kids. J.D. Vance is saying we need to support the kids that we got now, and we need to make sure that more people are having more kids. RFK is taking the stance that we need to make sure that even after these first crucial months that our next generations are growing up on healthy food, that they'll be able to fully process things. There are certain other health issues that come about that he loves to talk about. So all of these people are talking about the next generation, and I think it's because we are in America in crisis. One of the greatest arguments that comes from people on the left, I hear it all the time, why is immigration okay? Well, who's going to pick this? They're actually really important to the tax base. They're really important to the businesses and operating some of these jobs that people don't necessarily want. But even if they're not jobs that people don't want and wouldn't take, they are willing to get paid less for it, so they fill up these sort of jobs, leaving positions for other people in higher paying jobs, but also just ensuring that the economy continues to flow. And why is that an actual argument? Why is that important? Because there are less people that are being born naturally, so these positions can't be filled by the overall population, the general population. Now, I understand immigration has always been a method to supply a certain amount of workers. People who come from other countries work their way up as they take the lower paying jobs, as they start to learn the language, things like this. This is not something that's solely in the United States. But it's interesting that this argument becomes even more potent as we start to see declining birth rates. And I think it's very, very fascinating that all of these sort of conversations are floating around at the same time. People are starting to talk about children more, and that is either a sign of a renewed sense of understanding that our society will fail without them, or it's the inverse and it's the wondering why things don't look so hopeful and why people are dreading it. And it is a conversation that needs to happen more and more often. Now, I kind of imbued you with a little bit of hope there that people are talking about it. Now let's talk about something that's actually not good from one of the next generations. And the headline reads, Gen Zers are computer whizzes, just don't ask them to type. And I thought this was extremely fascinating because honestly, it's very true. Even in my school, where I went, where they were very computer focused, we had typing games. We were supposed to learn how to type. We had an entire class dedicated to it, I believe maybe once or twice a week. And there was one student who, I won't name him, but if you ever listen to this, you know exactly who you are, is a whiz. He was learning how to type. He had really big dreams. He was a very dedicated, focused person. He knew exactly what he wanted to go on to do, and he was learning how to type without looking from a very young age. He was very good at it, and all the rest of us, we can type okay, but we would normally look at the keyboard. This article really goes through and highlights how Gen Z actually grew up on computers, but we don't necessarily understand how to type without looking at the keys. And this is something that I've tried to get rid of myself. I still do it to this day. I still look at the keys, and there are some times where I've gone weeks on weeks of actively forcing myself to not look at the keys, to look at the screen, and it just doesn't necessarily work out well. I can still type pretty fast. Can I type 95 words per minute? Not necessarily. And when I try, it's actually very interesting because the argument's always, well, you can see your errors on the screen, which is sure, but also I can tell when I misspell something. If I know how to spell a word, which I'm not very good at spelling either, so maybe that's autocorrect right there, another issue with our generation. But if I know how to spell a word, and I'm looking at the keys as I'm typing extremely quickly, I can tell when I misspell something. So I don't necessarily think that's the greatest argument. The argument that they're outlining here is actually that it removes a sort of active function within your brain. So instead of having to look at it, process the information, and then operate off of that, you are just operating purely off the muscle memory that is there, and that is actually what makes it faster, which is an argument that resonates more with me than the, oh, well, you can see your mistakes on the computer. That one never really worked for me. So I thought it was a really interesting article. We're actually running low on time here, and also that's basically the synopsis of it, and with my little bit of a hot take, so I don't think we need to go fully into it. But if you want to read that article or any of today's articles, there are actually only 2 today, which is different. I normally don't do that, but I expanded on the first one a lot, and I think I kind of took it in a few different directions. So I understand if you're sitting there like, no, Alex, I just want to read the actual article. Go in the link in the description below, that like and subscribe button, and then you can go find them, read the entire thing. But before you go down there, let's talk about our daily delight. This one comes from the storyboard on the Flipboard website, comes from the Dog Snubs. Silliest dog knock-knock jokes that will still make you laugh. And I'll be honest, I didn't read all the knock-knock jokes because some of them are funny. It's honestly just the photo within this first story of a dog poking its head through the door that's supposed to come in at. And when I first read that, I was like, okay, that brought a little bit of a smile to my face. It's a little bit enjoyable on top of the graphic that they have there. So if you want to check that out, it's also down there in the description. Probably click on that one first if you want to smile before you start talking about some of these more existential things that we were going on about, and also how bad Gen Z is at typing. So with all that said, there's only one more. Oh, wait, hold on. Nope, I forgot all the self-promotion. If you want to check out the podcast on the RSS feed, you can find the links to Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine down in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the link to the Twitter handle at your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And I'm adding this now. If you're new, I also release something on Tuesday, Thursday here on the YouTube channel, as well as in the RSS feed, 6 and 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. That's really trying to fulfill the mission of Daily Flip, which is quick, easy news. And it's not necessarily commentary about the United States. It's quick and dirty. It's not trying to be like, oh, here's my opinion there, here's my opinion there. No, just provide the stories, get a synopsis out there, report what's going on. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.